Everybody, I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me once again is Dr. Rosemary Kalnic, the director of the Middle East program at Defense Priorities. Dr. Kalnic, thanks so much for coming back on.
Thanks for having me, Brittany. It's good to see you.
It's good to see you and get your perspective on the moment we find ourselves in now. The ceasefire is over, according to President Trump. He made the announcement during the NATO summit on Wednesday. He also added this, quote, "They're scum, they're sick people, they're led by sick people, and they're vicious, violent people. And if they had a nuclear weapon, they'd use it. As far as I'm concerned, it's over."
These aren't just words from Trump. This is the formal burial of a ceasefire that's been standing on shaky ground for months. So is this really a turning point, or just another one of Trump's classic outbursts? The expert answers that question directly.
Weapon, they'd use it. As far as I'm concerned, it's over. This came one day after Central Command announced that the United States struck over 80 Iranian targets in retaliation for Iranian attacks on commercial ships in the Strait of Hormuz. So to start off the conversation, what are your thoughts on where we're at right now?
Well, we're not in a good place, and it's too early to tell if Trump really means this, if this is really a change in policy, or if this is, a fit of anger. Trump does sometimes, speak out of turn or say sort of emotional things about, expressing frustration with the process. So we don't know for sure that it's really over, but the CENTCOM attacks, and in addition to that, the U.S. Putting sanctions back on Iranian oil, right? We just yesterday rescinded the waiver on Iranian oil sales. Those two things are pretty big indicators that something fundamentally has shifted.
So it's not just talk. There are concrete moves behind it too. Sanctions coming back, military strikes. These aren't empty threats. But the real question is, do these moves actually put the U.S. in a stronger position, or the exact opposite?
Iranian oil, right? We just yesterday rescinded the waiver on Iranian oil sales. Those two things are pretty big indicators that something fundamentally has shifted. And if that's the case, and we're back in something closer to a war scenario with Iran, that's not a good place for the U.S. to be, because none of the fundamentals have shifted in the U.S.'s favor. And ultimately, the world has now depleted more barrels of oil inventories and stockpiles, and it gets us closer to the giant supply crunch that many have worried about and warned about for the past several months.
And here's the critical part. The world's oil reserves are running dry, and the longer this war drags on, the closer we get to the exact supply crisis everyone's been warning about. What's even more striking? The agreement that was signed is now essentially dead too.
The giant supply crunch that many have worried about and warned about for the past several months.
So does this mean that memorandum of understanding that was signed by both sides in June is effectively over, because we're seeing a ceasefire that is no more because both sides have struck each other, as well as the Treasury Department, like you said, no longer allowing Iran to produce, transport, and sell oil? So what does that mean for the MOU?
Yeah, it does seem to nullify the MOU. Doesn't mean they can't go back and extend it. Trump has done that sometimes when he said, oh, this deal's over, and then he goes and extends a ceasefire, or, they could continue to negotiate and talk. Well, that's, we don't know yet if that's going to happen. But all of the conditions that the MOU stipulated now are defunct. The United States was supposed to give Iran immediate access to frozen assets. We did not do that. Iran was supposed to allow unfettered passage of ships through Hormuz. They did not do that, right? They instead threw down the gauntlet and attacked ships that were not coordinating with Iran, ships that were using the Oman route, that were, we think, guided by the U.S. military, et cetera, because Iran is trying to really make a play for having control over the Strait of Hormuz and having that be recognized in such a fashion that they could potentially institute tolls in the future.
So Iran isn't just retaliating. They're making a long-term play here. Effective control over the Strait of Hormuz, and eventually the right to charge tolls for passage. That's the kind of move that could permanently shift regional power dynamics. Now let's get to one of the boldest threats Trump has put on the table.
In such a fashion that they could potentially institute tolls in the future. And now, the other main thing the United States said it would do was to lift sanctions, which we did actually do that. We don't know yet if the U.S. is going to put the blockade back on. That's another wrinkled or another thing that the MOU sort of took off, but it's possible that that can happen. But most of the provisions of the MOU are now over, and some of them never even went all the way to the finish line, right? So we never saw a ceasefire, a real ceasefire in Lebanon, for instance, between Israel and Hezbollah as well. So to say it's on life support is probably generous at this point.
At the NATO summit on Wednesday, President Trump also indicated what could be next. He said that the United States will probably strike Iran again tonight. He said that the U.S. was capable of taking out Iran's bridges, power plants, and desalination plants. And he also said this: "We may take over Kharg Island. There's not a thing they can do about it." He also said that we attacked Kharg Island last night, and Kharg Island is Iran's key oil export hub. It's located in the Persian Gulf and processes around 90% of Iran's oil exports.
90% of Iran's oil exports flow through a single island, and Trump is naming it as a target. If this actually happens, how does the regional balance shift? The expert's answer is a bit surprising. She thinks most of it is bluster. But what's genuinely alarming is what happens if it isn't.
We attacked Kharg Island last night, and Kharg Island is Iran's key oil export hub. It's located in the Persian Gulf and processes around 90% of Iran's oil exports. What do you make of that?
Yeah, so I think a lot of it is bluster, and it's not something we haven't heard before. Trump has made these threats before and not carried them out. I think because Trump understands that carrying them out will be net painful for the United States, not net beneficial. The reason being that Iran can retaliate along all of these metrics or in all of these domains in ways that hurt the United States plausibly more than the U.S. can hurt Iran. So Kharg Island, for instance, right? It's big news if we did actually attack Kharg Island, if we attacked sort of the oil infrastructure facilities on Kharg Island as opposed to military targets on it. That's not something that we've done before, if that's what Trump is referring to, if that occurred. But if we attack Iranian oil infrastructure, if we attack Iranian civilian infrastructure, they will respond by attacking Gulf oil infrastructure and Gulf civilian infrastructure. And that causes a huge headache for the United States in a bunch of ways.
And this is where it gets serious. Iran has relatively little left to lose, but the entire Gulf region has an enormous amount at stake. This isn't just a threat anymore. It's a gamble with the global economy. So what would the long-term cost of this war actually look like?
Structure and Gulf civilian infrastructure. And that causes a huge headache for the United States in a bunch of ways. One, that means more expensive interceptors that the U.S. has to expend to defend these facilities as much as possible from Iranian counterstrikes. It also means that some of those strikes are going to go through and some of that infrastructure is going to be damaged. And when you think about how much oil was coming out of Iran versus the rest of the Gulf before the war, right? There was not quite 2 million barrels a day coming through Iran. There was about 18 million barrels a day coming from the other countries, right? That means that Iran could, at maximum, take 18 million barrels a day of oil off the market if they shot everything up, right? They probably can't do that. For imposing damage is much higher than our ceiling for imposing damage on Iran. Iran has gone without exports before, right? During periods of maximum pressure by the Trump administration, Iranian exports were extremely low, near zero, right? So they can weather and have in the past weathered that economic shock, but it's not clear that the global economy can weather the kind of retaliation that Iran can do across the Gulf if we attack Iran in these ways. So that is not a good situation for the U.S. to create.
To that point, what exactly are those long-term ramifications here of President Trump saying now that the ceasefire's over?
Well, I mean, the long-term ramifications are we just don't know where this is going or where it's going to end up. I think the short-term ramifications are huge, right? Short-term ramifications could mean a return to all-out war. If there is all-out war, then you start to maybe get longer-term ramifications of oil industry or oil infrastructure being destroyed, and it takes a long time to rebuild that. Usually, most oil infrastructure is actually pretty rebuildable most of the time, but not when you're talking about destroying an entire region's worth all at the same time. That's something that would be very difficult to recover from. And the loss of production that we've seen so far, it hasn't been because Iran destroyed these facilities. It's been because Iran turned off Hormuz, and that meant they couldn't export their oil, so they just turned off their tap. Their taps have been sitting there waiting to be turned back on. That process takes time in and of itself. If now we have parts of the taps destroyed, that just adds days and weeks and months and perhaps longer to the timeline for restarting production when we actually get to a solid, a steady state where there's traffic resuming and things are approaching something like normal again.
So the losses so far have actually been reversible. It was just the taps being shut off. But if the physical infrastructure gets destroyed, this crisis could stretch on for months, maybe even years. So what options does Trump actually have on the table?
Steady state where there's traffic resuming and things are approaching something like normal again.
I want to read part of a statement you've released after President Trump announced the ceasefire was over. This is what you said. Ending the ceasefire with Iran over skirmishes in Hormuz would be missing the forest for the trees, and Trump must not make that mistake. The war with Iran does not and never has served U.S. interests. It has cost U.S. lives, wasted U.S. treasure, and sapped U.S. military power, all while strengthening Iran by demonstrating its leverage over the Strait of Hormuz. Thinking from that perspective here, what do you think the United States and President Trump needs to do right now?
Well, Trump has three options. One he's currently pursuing, which is escalation, is not an option that's going to bring us to a better place, right? The other two options are he could decide to just walk away, right? He could decide, look, I'm going to cut my losses. He fought this war. The war went poorly. The war strengthened Iran's position and weakened the United States. But he could walk away and decide to let local actors figure out what's going to be exported through Hormuz and whether there's going to be tolls paid for it, and just figure that they will reach some kind of political accommodation with Iran, most likely, that, isn't great for the US, but we can live with. A better option would be to actually negotiate some kind of durable deal with Iran that settles this once and for all, or at least once and for all for, at least a few years as opposed to a few weeks, right? Where, potentially we get some concession on nuclear, program things that Trump fought this war about. But not even that. The most important thing is we have to get Hormuz reopened because it's so important for the global economy.
Three paths: escalate the war, walk away entirely, or strike a lasting deal. The expert makes it clear which one is the smart choice. But given Trump's track record, which one he'll actually pick is anyone's guess. Finally, let's ask what we should be watching for in the coming days.
Is we have to get Hormuz reopened because it's so important for the global economy. And we have expended large amounts of global stockpiles cushioning this shutdown for 4 months now, right? And those stockpiles are going to be running out. So Trump needs to make a deal with Iran that restores some kind of stable transit through the strait, even if that means that Iran asserts some form of sovereignty or leverage or tolling over oil. So be it. It's not good for the US. It's a failure of the Trump administration's policy, but we can afford to pay, the global economy can afford to pay tolls, better than it can afford a complete stoppage of oil through the Strait of Hormuz. And that is what Iran can threaten.
You and I have been speaking now over the past couple of months as we've seen this war and this conflict play out. And we've seen President Trump time and time again say one thing, bring us almost to the brink. I remember the one time back in April, he threatened to wipe Iran off of the face of the earth. Then he, just hours later, said, oh, there's a ceasefire agreement here. Specifically, what are you looking out for next? Do you think that this is one of those times where President Trump says one thing and then walks it back?
It's possible. I mean, the man zigzags very frequently, and certainly I hope that that's what happens because there's no strategic benefit to resuming an all-out war with Iran. The war made our situation worse, so it's likely that more war will make the situation even more worse. What I'm looking for is, does Trump reimpose a military blockade? That's a big signal, right? That's a big signal that things have gone in the wrong direction in a way that's likely to be lasting, because once he puts the blockade on, it's harder for him to then backtrack and take it off. He's done it before, but he doesn't like to do it because it makes him look weak, potentially, or he thinks it makes him look weak. That's a big thing to look for. What happens to oil prices? That's another signal. Now, oil prices have gone up. Are they going to go up to the heights that they were at the beginning of the war? That's not clear, but if it does, that tells us something interesting. And it suggests that there would be more pressure on Trump to come to a conclusion sooner rather than later.
Dr. Kalnic, I always appreciate our conversations. Thank you so much for analyzing this moment. I hope to have more soon. Thanks for the discussion.
Thank you.
So keep your eye on two things: whether the blockade comes back and where oil prices head next. Those two signals will tell us whether Trump is truly committed to war or headed back to the negotiating table.